Thank you. This conversation is about the political power of public sector unions. What you're going to hear this morning may actually be a little bit of a surprise to you. I know that because many of our state legislators are continually surprised by the power of the public sector unions in Harrisburg. The truth is, public sector unions stand in the way of every reasonable reform in Pennsylvania, and we should be very concerned about that as conservatives. Gina Diorio, you got a brief introduction to her, as Public Affairs Director to the Commonwealth Partners Chamber of Entrepreneurs. It's a Harrisburg-based organization that's engaging entrepreneurs to lead free market change in Pennsylvania. Prior to that, she worked for the Commonwealth Foundation and has an MA in public policy from Regent University. My name's David Osborne. I'm CEO of Americans for Fair Treatment. We are devoted to educating public sector employees as to their constitutional rights in a unionized workplace and providing them with every available resource to defend those rights. I've litigated against teachers' unions, state and municipal unions like UFCW, AFSCME, and SEIU. I was also a Trump appointee to something called the Federal Service Impasses Panel, which broke impasses between federal agencies and the unions that represent federal workers. So Gina, before we go any further, I want to connect on something that has hit home for many of you here, school closures during the pandemic.
Yes.
So, wait, how did teachers' unions affect local decisions about whether to open up schools over the past year?
Yeah, David, that's a great question. And we heard a lot, about school closures. I'm sure, like David said, many of you were affected. And what we really saw, not only on the national level, but also on the state level, was that unions played a key role in keeping schools closed. And I'll actually reference an article that came out by an investigative reporter named Todd Shepard in the outlet Broad and Liberty, which is a great outlet. If you don't follow it, sign up for their stuff, it's great. But it showed that last summer actually, right before the state issued guidance on schools reopening, some of the most powerful teachers unions in the state, like the Pennsylvania State Education Association and the state chapter of American Federation of Teachers, met with key officials in the Wolf administration. And after that meeting, the state issued guidance, and there were many schools, a lot of local schools, who had been planning to go back in person. But after this guidance came out, they switched course, decided to close down, shut down because of this guidance that the teachers' unions influenced. And this was an example of the same thing going on the national level. Perhaps one of the worst examples is the LA Teachers Union, who put out a laundry list of requirements for reopening, many of which had nothing to do with COVID. We saw things like, we need Medicare for all in order to reopen. We need a wealth tax in order to reopen. We need a moratorium on charter schools in order to open. So really what these government unions were doing, and these public sector unions were doing, is using shutdowns as a negotiating tool to get at what their agenda really was, which had nothing to do with students, nothing to do with education, and nothing to do with COVID. In fact, Corey DeAngelis, who's with the American Federation for Children, he did a study of 835 public school districts, and that it showed that the correlation between whether they reopened or not had nothing to do with the spread of COVID in the community, but the strength of the local union. And in districts that had strong local unions, they were more likely to stay closed rather than reopen. And one thing I should mention, sometimes we equate teachers' unions with teachers, and that's not always the case, because a lot of times there's teachers who disagree with the union on this. They want to go back to the classroom, but teachers' unions don't always represent the interests of teachers, and definitely not of children and students.
Yep. So this may be obvious to many of us, but this has always been the case in state and local government.
Yeah.
Teachers definitely saw this as an opportunity to push many of the taxes they pushed before, but in many places they've been doing that for a very long time. Just it hasn't affected all of us at home. So Gina, tell us a little bit more broadly, if we could zoom out. So why in the world would unions, teachers' unions included, why would unions exert so much influence in public policy? What's in it for them?
Yeah, and to get to the root of that, we have to look at the structure of unions. And I should back up and say here that we're talking about government unions, so public sector unions whose members are public sector employees. They're government employees, state, local, county, municipal. That's who their membership is. So if we look at their structure, where do government unions get their money? They get a lot of their money from their membership dues. Who are their members? Government workers. So unions have a vested self-interest in any policy that will grow the size and the scope of government, because that then means we have more, what? Government workers, and they have more members, which means they have more union dues, which they can then use to lobby the government for more government, which means more members. So it's kind of this vicious cycle. So when we see things, unions doing things like lobbying for more government programs, for higher taxes, for expansion of the size and scope of government, it's in their self-interest to do so because that's how they expand their membership base, and then that's how they fill their coffers.
Yeah, so this is stuff antithetical to what you people believe as conservatives. Right. Bigger government, more taxes. How much money are we talking about, Gina?
Oh, I mean, since, in the past 13, 14 years, government unions in Pennsylvania have put over $150 million into politics. A lot of that is directly into campaign contributions to political candidates via their political action committees, and then a lot is spent from member dues on lobbying, on political engagement and lobbying.
Yeah, so we work with a lot of public employees, and I'll tell you one thing that bugs a lot of teachers about their teachers' unions is that about 93% of teachers' unions' political dollars end up going exclusively to Democrats. Even if you think maybe teachers are roughly 60-40 Democrat, Republican, I'm not sure what the numbers are there. 93% is not nearly reflective of the members that teachers' unions are supposed to be representing. Yet they're doing that with the money that comes from teachers. Yeah. Gina, along the way, unions have not only gotten policy results, the kinds that we're talking about, higher taxes, bigger government, they've also changed the rules of the game, and that makes it easier for them to win. So tell us a little bit about the political privileges. You've spent a lot of time in the public sphere talking about this. The political privileges of the public sector unions that allow them to exert this influence in a way that we could never do as conservatives.
Yeah. Well, there are many, and we've all heard, the mantra, taxpayer resources should not be used for political purposes, right? I mean, how many of us, we've heard that at some point in time, an elected official goes down because they used taxpayer resources for politics. But unfortunately, government unions in Pennsylvania have that perk, and what they can do is use publicly funded payroll systems to collect their political campaign contributions. So here's how this works. We have state and local school districts, state and local municipalities. And who funds the payroll system for government workers? Taxpayers, right? Because it's a government service. But what government unions can do is these school districts will take from workers' paychecks not only their union dues, but also their political campaign contributions, send it directly to the government unions, so the government unions don't have to go out like every other private organization and ask for political contributions. Instead, hey, it's just directed, thanks to the government and thanks to we the taxpayers, to these government unions. And unions are the only organization that has this perk. Imagine if we had this for the NRA or Planned Parenthood, that our taxpayer resources were helping them collect their campaign contributions. There would be an outcry, and rightfully so, but government unions have that privilege that they're able to do that. And another perk they have is they can trap members into memberships. We talked a little bit about the structure of government unions, that they thrive on keeping members in the union and getting a lot of members. But there's a provision in state law called maintenance of membership. I know you've worked a lot on this too, David. And this provision says that a public sector union can public sector union member can resign his or her union membership only during a 15-day window at the close of a contract. Now, these contracts can go on for years, and union members don't always know when they end, and the union is not required to tell them when they end. So if a union member misses their window of resigning, they're stuck in that membership for multiple years more. What's more, sometimes unions conveniently, didn't get their resignation request. So unions are able to just trap their members in, continue collecting membership dues because of this provision in state law. Now, thankfully, there have been efforts on both these fronts to repeal a lot lot of these privileges. In fact, one bill now that's been introduced by Representative David Rowe, who's just north of here of Snyder and Union counties. Yay, I know, David Rowe. So, yeah. It's House Bill 1117, and it would address a lot of these issues and really level the playing field. So we're not giving special political privileges to these organizations that are very political in nature.
All right, so tough question, Gina.
Okay.
One of the reasons I wanted Gina to come up here is that she wrote an article and made the claim that unions are renting some of our Republicans until they can own a Democrat. Okay, so if unions are pushing for things that are antithetical to what we believe, and we just talked about all their political privileges, why in the world would Republicans ever trust them? What's going on?
That's a great question. And there are some Republicans who I think have been fooled by government unions. What they do is they think the unions are their friends, and the unions will actually come out and endorse them. We've seen this in the Southeast, that some of the unions will come out and endorse some of these Republicans who are in office, and Republicans will vote with the unions, and they know that if they oppose a union, the union will spend big against them. We mentioned that $150 million. That goes against any candidate who opposes the union. So there's several Republicans who are like, hey, the union endorsed me. They might have even given me a little bit of money. So I think they're kind of my friend. But what they haven't always realized is these same unions turn around, and they might endorse a Republican, but they will then spend hundreds of thousands of dollars against that same Republican via front groups. So what they do is they give money to other political organizations that then go after these Republicans. And these are groups that a lot of us have never heard of. I know I hadn't, at first, but these are groups like a group called Fund for Change that spent $7.2 million last year targeting Republicans. They got a chunk of their money from government unions. Groups like the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, who targets Republicans, they get money from government unions. Group like Fairness PA, who was one of Governor Wolf's biggest political donors last election in 2018, and they go after Republicans, they get money from government unions. So these Republicans are like, hey, I got the union endorsement, I'm going to post it on Facebook, this is great. But these same unions then turn around and go after them. And I should mention, this is not all Republicans. There are a lot of good ones who recognize the unions for what they are and will stand up to them. But unfortunately, we do have some that are misled.
Give me names. I want names. That didn't make you popular, did it?
It did not make me popular, no.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned Dave Rowe's bill.
Yeah.
What else does Dave Rowe's bill do?
It addresses, as I said specifically, it repeals maintenance of membership, so a union member can leave at any time. It also would end what's called, the public payroll collection of union dues, of union political contributions. So unions would have to go out and get that money themselves. So in essence, the bottom line is it really levels the playing field, because unions have the right to engage in politics. They're free to do so, and they should be free to do so. But what they shouldn't be free to do is rely on taxpayers to help them do so.
Yeah. Well, you didn't mention my favorite part about Dave Rowe's bill. We pushed something, I've got a button here somewhere, Union Democracy Now. If we're going to have unions, they should be democratic and reflective of their membership. That's one of the big problems with unions right now. There's something in Dave Rowe's bill called recertification. Fact is, there are many unions that have been around since the 1970s, and not a single employee represented by that union today was one of the employees who voted them in the very beginning. Unions do not have to prove that they have the support of their membership. What recertification does is require unions to stand for basically re-election by their own members. And the default is, if they cannot get the support of their own membership, they lose and they're out. That would return power back to many of our state and local governments and to you as taxpayers. What else can people do about unions? This behemoth of an organization.
Yeah, it is a behemoth of an organization, but they have lots of local chapters, and these local chapters are in communities across Pennsylvania. So what you can do is go to your local school board meeting, find out what the union contract says. There are provisions in some contracts where school teachers can leave the classroom, go work for the union, and you're still paying them. So they're still getting taxpayer dollars. And unions aren't going to volunteer this information, but if you're at your local school board meeting, ask. When there's contract negotiations, ask to see it, because like you said, it is a behemoth organization, but they have lots of tentacles. And these tentacles are things that are very close to all of us. So I would encourage you to pay attention to what's going on in your local community when it comes to what government unions are doing.
Where can people find you?
We are at thecommonwealthpartners.com, www.thecommonwealthpartners.com.
Okay, and we're at americansforfairtreatment.org. Encourage you to reach out, especially if you're a public sector union member. We can help you take action, stand up against your union. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.